I'm here with my Major Arcana. Oh, here you are. The Major Arcana in these previous weeks, this previous month actually, we've touched on all of the Minor Arcana in the Tarot, which is where I prefer to start when I'm teaching people how to read Tarot, because I find that the Minor Arcana are much a smaller scope, simpler to understand cards than the deep, complex, and loaded Major Arcana. And I think it's really good to understand some of the characteristics of the four elements and the four suits, because they fold into the Major Arcana a lot, and many of the Major Arcana will draw on elements of multiple suits at the same time. So it's nice to have sort of the bedrock of knowledge of the Minor Arcana going into understanding how some of that manifests in the Major Arcana. If you hadn't caught the previous weeks, don't worry about it. I'm going to contextualize these in a way that makes sense without that. The Major Arcana starts and ends with the Fool. The Fool is this kind of enigmatic character that we spoke to a little bit earlier on the shuffle when my friend Josh called in. This is his favorite card. So it's one that we offered some definition to then. I love the Fool. It's this character that kind of represents a tabla blanca, the blank slate. This person with no preconception about the world in front of them or anything. They're experiencing everything for the first time. Here at the very beginning of our cycle of the Major Arcana, and I say cycle, all these previous weeks we've gone over the cycle. There's kind of a narrative and a story told across each suit that you can kind of follow the progression, and it really helps to see the connections between the cards and the flow of the story across the cards when you're really trying to understand them. And a lot of the interesting wisdom that's kind of embedded in the system of the tarot kind of comes forward when we look at the whole story of the general cycle and order that these kind of snippets of human experience typically come to us. The story of the Major Arcana is our grandest, of course, of the five suits, the trump suit here in the tarot, and goes real deep. It's going to start with the Fool, who resembles this character who has not really experienced what's before them before, so they have no idea really what they're getting into. There's a handful of symbols here in the Fool that I want to point out. One is the Fool's faithful companion, this little dog in the lower corner, who's usually barking some sort of warning to the Fool, who's kind of walking listlessly, looking upward toward a cliff's edge. And the story here is a little bit that as they approach this cliff's edge, they're about to learn about gravity really fast. But we're the Fool, so we don't really have a preconception about gravity. And the Fool has this really kind of almost, well, brave or maybe foolish characteristic that they have no fear of leaping into the unknown. And there's kind of this illustration of leaping into the unknown offered by this card through the cliff that appears. And the Fool doesn't know fear. The Fool doesn't really know any of these feelings yet. They've yet to really experience them. The Fool really resembles this fresh place approaching someone. When I draw the Fool in a reading, it usually presents itself to me when there is a leap into the unknown, or there is something completely new being presented to us, or the suggestion that we could take a step back and experience it like it's new, sort of like happens in the Hanged Man later in the cycle, much later, outside of these first 8. We'll get there. But the Fool kind of starts our journey, and oftentimes the whole story of the Major Arcana is described as the Fool's journey. The Fool is kind of our archetypal protagonist, our young, potent hero who's going to set out and experience the world. From the perspective of the Major Arcana, the first stop on the Fool's journey is the Magician. The very first thing that we experience as the Fool is those ways in which we have power to interact with and manipulate the world. The Magician is a card that, to me, embodies a very fiery and airy character. It just has a kind of pronounced masculine character. It's kind of a nice masculine counterpart to the feminine High Preistess that we're going to get to in a minute. And the air and fire elements, or the wands and swords in the tarot, kind of are associated with masculine characteristics, whereas water and earth are more associated with feminine characteristics, which comes up a lot in the tarot. The tarot kind of breaks a lot of things into systems of 2, masculine and feminine, or systems of 4, the 4 elements. The magician is where we start to realize the ways that we can interact with the world. It's all kind of about your ability to manifest things. It usually kind of resembles a certain kind of potency in your character, in your aptitude. The fool sets out on their journey, finds something that they want to interact with, and begins exerting what will and power they have over that. They discover that they have the ability to change the world around them. The magician is where we realize that our will can manifest. And in a reading, it can resemble that you are in a place where you have the potential to manifest your will. You have the resources, the skills, and the power here to be the magician, to summon forth the reality you desire with the elements in front of you. The magician's pictured usually by a table or altar, and with all the elements, all the suits resembled before them, the wand, the cup, the pentacle, the sword, to illustrate that they have this power over all of the reality, all the elements that are in front of them. And the feminine counterpart to the magician is a really profound and interesting card. The High Priestess resembles, in our fool's journey, of course, they first experience putting themselves out in the world. They try to interact with it, and they're like, wow, I can change the world. Fascinating. I exist. Wow. This is the very beginning of the cycle. We're starting with the basics. Once we've reached the High Priestess, it's more a realization that there's a lot of the world outside of our direct experience that we're connected to. The High Priestess offers this realization that there's a huge world and collective universe that we are a part of, and in some intangible way connected to. And the High Priestess shows us how, through our intuition and our higher spiritual self, we can draw on our connection to the rest of the world and the universe. The High Priestess kind of resembles a lot of the fortune-telling work we do in a tarot reading, the divinary work, or the work we do kind of accessing our own intuition to bring to us messages that weren't immediately with us. The High Priestess resembles the unknown, the mysterious, those things outside of our awareness, outside of our control, outside of what we could manipulate as the magician. The High Priestess shows us that wisdom, those interesting, deep messages that come to us seemingly from outside of ourselves, and the wisdom that we can draw from that. So the fool kind of experiences how they can interact with the world, and then how they can receive the world, perceive the world, even when it's not directly in front of them. And at this point in the cycle, we reach the Empress. This kind of point in the cycle suggests, okay, so I can interact with the world, I can perceive the world. What do I do with that? And the Empress resembles providence in a way, the ability for us to provide for ourselves and others. The Empress really brings forward that element of providing home and hearth and security, which, if we're thinking about our most basic human needs, is one of the first things that we really need to fulfill before we move forward. If you're thinking about maybe Maslow's pyramid of needs for any psychologists out there, this is where we start. We start by building our home, our security, our food, our providence for ourselves and for those in the world immediately around us. The Empress is about realizing that ability to provide. We're looking at sort of the elements in front of us that we can control and manifest, and asking, how do I apply that? And the Empress says, we can receive those elements, cultivate them, and grow from them and grow with them. The Empress is usually pictured with something like a spinning wheel, though not in this traditional white tarot, Raider White Tarot, usually in some sort of field or pasture with things growing. Looks like we got grapes budding in the background in this vineyard built around the Empress. And she's sort of resembling that she has this to provide. The people come to the Empress when they need to receive comfort, guidance, or that actual material wealth of the food and home The Empress is the one who provides these for her domain. We're coming into realizing the full, trying to realize, what do I have control over? I've experienced some of the world, and I've tried to exert my will on it, and had some success, realized where I can, and noticed that there's a boundary, that there's the world beyond me. And now I'm like, okay, so there's a certain domain that I do exist in, and that I do have some control over. How can I make that serve me and those in my domain? That's where the Empress really sort of starts to come into play and resemble that growth for the Fool on our journey. The Empress and the Emperor follows the Empress in the cycle here as number 4, which we just drew a moment earlier. The Emperor is the one I've got tucked away. How can we realize the really powerfully positive aspects of the Emperor? They make a nice masculine and feminine pair here on our journey through the Major Arcana. And the Emperor is more interested in really deciding exactly how things are to operate in the domain, where the Empress is receiving people, receiving the world around them, and working with that to create as much providence as she can. The Emperor is going forward into the world, saying, this is the way I want things to be, and this is the way I'm going to make them, and I'm going to direct people to help me. So there's a lot where in the Magician, we were kind of realizing how we have this ability to manifest things around us, or manifest things for ourselves. The Emperor goes forward and says, I want to make you work for my manifestation. Whereas the Empress was saying, I want to provide what I found and have for you. These 3 and 4 in the Major Arcana kind of break out from where I was really focused on just my personal experience of the world into how I can directly interact with kind of my interpersonal sphere. If this was my personal sector of experience, this is now addressing how that ties into my interpersonal world, the world directly around me that I can interact with. The Emperor brings that forward and says, I want to make the world the way I want it to be, because I say so. At this point, we're so early in the cycle that a lot of the motive for this action is still just because I am, because I exist. And there's not a lot of thought beyond that, or reason, or need for reason beyond that. At this point in the cycle, we have not considered things outside of that very simple, plain, I am kind of energy. There's a lot of Aries in the Emperor who says, I am, I do, because I am. Don't need a reason. Do it for its own sake. And the Emperor is a very powerful character because they're not fettered by any outside kind of control. You're simply just me. No complication. And that's a kind of powerful, unbounded place to act from. The Emperor leads into the Hierophant. This is the first place in the cycle of the Major Arcana where the Fool begins to realize boundaries outside of them that they cannot control. As we attempt to exert our will on the world in the Emperor, we begin to realize the boundaries of what we can't influence in the Hierophant. Hierophant resembles sort of the papacy, the clergy tradition, the way things are, society, culture, and just all of those things that are so entrenched. This is the way things are. The Emperor comes forward and says, I am genderqueer and I want the world to accept that. And then the Hierophant says, there's a lot of people who don't see it that way. And suddenly it's a challenge. It's a real challenge for the Fool in their journey. The Hierophant resembles this restriction, these rules that they have to work inside, these limitations that they have to operate within. We're working in a society that's still growing. There's a lot about societal influence that's resembled in the Hierophant, and those first initial boundaries, but especially those boundaries that we can't control. These are the rules by which we must abide because they weren't our choice to begin with. The Hierophant kind of operates as a nice pair to the Lovers. I really appreciate the message that the Lovers brings in to the Hierophant, because the Lovers is kind of about deviating from the social norms that the Hierophant imposes. The Lovers is all about finding other people aligned to our interests, that want to diverge on our own unique path together. And so here I am, I'm genderqueer, I want to be so, and I found people that accept me and want to really bring forward my message, and I found a community, and we've got this explosive, excited energy between us, as though the energy between lovers. The lovers can resemble that very literal energy between lovers, and that joining that comes forward in the new direction that they're choosing to go together, that defies the norms or the restrictions brought in by the Hierophant. The lovers is about breaking out boldly on our own path, on our own way. It's a very fun and exciting place in the Major Arcana. Here's our fool's journey come up through trying to exert my will, finding the limitations, and then finding those avenues, those people, those spaces where I'm able to subvert the limitations presented by the Hierophant and move into something new and continue to work my will and myself into the world around me and with the people around me, where we were seeing the personal sphere resembled in the Magician and the High Priestess, and the interpersonal sphere resembled in the Empress and the Emperor. I see the Hierophant as showing us sort of that extra-personal sphere of reality, that places that exist that aren't within our direct control or our direct interaction. And the lovers brings it back to me. I see this one existing more in the interpersonal sphere again, because we're kind of interacting with it on a direct level with the world around us that has presented the opportunity for us to diverge and go in the direction that we want. That's ours. It brings us to a very fun place at the Chariot, and very excited at how quickly I'm getting through a lot of the Major Arcana. I was thinking originally I might only make it this far, but I might get a little further. We'll see. The Chariot is, whew, this is the, you done it now. You went ahead and you went off on your own way. You diverged from the norm and you stirred the pot. You went ahead and said, I'm off the beaten path. I am on my own way. And in the Chariot, there's a lot of motion. In fact, I want to draw this card from another deck that resembles it a little differently. In some decks, the Chariot always features usually two horses or two figures, in these cases on the traditional Rider-Waite, the two Sphinxes, who are driving the Chariot, riding it forward. And some decks show them as like sort of rampaging forward, frothing at the mouth. There's a lot of motion that's happening in the Chariot that's set into motion by the choices you made in the lovers. By the time we've reached the Chariot, we are full committed to the choices that we've made in the lovers. And now we've got to direct the action. We've went ahead and left the norm, and now we're just in this space. We can't go back. This is kind of like the point of no return. I've declared my intention in the lovers, and now I see you in the chat there again, Gender Trash, whose name I'm still not over. The Chariot is your birth card. And then you say, and the Tower. The Tower's a fun one. We'll see if we get that far in the cycle. I appreciate you following the Tower with a devil emoji, knowing the Tower's meaning. That's really appropriate. It has a birth card. That's really interesting, the Chariot, because it really is about managing a lot of fast-moving parts. Because you're pictured at the head of the Chariot in this, and you're kind of at the reins. So what's happened is you kind of put into motion a lot in the lovers. You've made some choices that have got things moving in the direction you wanted now, and now it's action. Now it's happening, and you have to direct its course. You have to manage these, the movement that's happening forward that you've set in motion. I'm gonna go ahead and go into here and pull out some more Major Arcana. We'll see how far we make it through the set. I would love to make it all the way to the Tower for you and see if I can get all the way there. When I did all the minor Arcana, I kind of drew a narrative, a story to parallel the cards, because grounding them in a really specific example is a great way to understand their more discrete meaning. And it's definitely more challenging to do with the Major Arcana because they speak to such large archetypal concepts. In fact, when Major Arcana appear in a tarot card reading, they can be some of the more difficult cards to interpret because of the large umbrella that they cover in terms of their definition and their meaning. I've oftentimes found myself in readings when I've drawn Major Arcana in key positions, finding that I have space now for follow-up questions and more cards to draw later that it's kind of provoked some thought for. And I almost see the easiest analogy to draw on as just the cycle that we live through life. There's sort of this very young, newborn aspect to the Fool. And that energy becomes this childlike first experience of the world, and our Magician and High Priestess, and our somewhat childlike first instances of trying to control the world and exert our will on our immediate world, in the Empress and Emperor. And from our younger perspective and experience of the Hierophant, it's this moment of us realizing the rules that exist around us that we can't control. And the Lovers is our first deviant. Maybe now we're getting towards adolescence, our choosing to deviate from what's been given to us previously. Maybe there's a transition in this cycle from sort of younger and more juvenile aspects, which is interesting to pin juvenile aspects on the Empress and the Emperor. Remembering that these are very old. Look at the Emperor's nice long white beard. Beard. Nice long white beard. These are very old and sort of characters who have grown into this position and have this responsibility, but ultimately the Emperor's very simple, straightforward, I am, I do, you do because I say energy has a juvenile characteristic to it. And it's really interesting how our juvenile and young childlike characteristics can manifest in ourselves in our adulthood. And we're going to be revisiting all spots of this cycle throughout our lives, the whole way through. And I've met plenty of adults, people my age, older and younger, who usually agree, we're all children, the body gets bigger, and I just feel like I'm a kid trapped in this old body. It's just the funny thing about our experience of the world. I want to bring us back to the Chariot and see how far I can get in the Major Arcana. The Tower is going to be a stretch goal for me. Once you've kind of mastered your control of all the moving pieces in the Chariot, here I am at this kind of adolescent level of growth, and I've started to deviate from norms in a way that have stirred the pot and directed me on this difficult to manage course. I'm in the Chariot. But the Chariot, one of the key aspects of the Chariot is that you have the ability to manage what's going on. You set off on an adventure that was one you were ready for, one that you wanted. And in the Chariot, you are demonstrating your success in following through with the direction that you've chosen in the Lovers. Brings us to a nice sound conclusion in Strength, which is one of the tarot cards that I think the name of the card actually resembles its definition very well. We'll come up on Temperance and some others later that I also feel the same way about. But Strength is really this place of realizing your fortitude and your will. It's interesting. Back when we were at the Magician, you'll notice there's this little infinity sign over the Magician's head that I've seen a lot of times cited resembling infinite potential. And just realizing the depth and the power of your will and how your will has this ability to manifest. That comes back in Strength. We're reminded, after going through our journey in the Chariot and arriving sort of through all of that journey and arriving more at a destination, we're like, wow, look at the power that I have to go against the norms of the Hierophant, to dare defy that direction, to find those in the Lovers that will deviate with me, to follow through with it in the Chariot and carry on my way. Wow, look at me. The Strength is where we realize the inner strength that we have that can carry us through the challenges and roadblocks that we face in our life. And it's a gentle strength and perseverance that's resembled in this card. And I really like bringing it to perseverance and resolution. It's about having the resolve and the tenacity to not give up our will. Because ultimately, with enough will and enough energy and enough time, we arrive at our goals. Strength resembles how investing our time and our will eventually get there. Kind of realize that we have the power to, if I haven't gotten there, it's because I haven't tried hard enough, long enough. So it's kind of a really fun place in the Major Arcana, arriving at this place of power. In this set, previous to here, I've been kind of pairing people off. I held the Fool as this kind of enigmatic, separate first and simultaneously last card in the cycle of the Major Arcana. I'll tie it back into the Fool when we're finished with the set. The Magician and the High Priestess are a really nice masculine-feminine pair. So do the Empress and Emperor, make a really nice masculine-feminine pair. The Hierophant and the Lovers are a really nice kind of opposing set together, though they both bear characteristics of masculine and feminine character to me, so I wouldn't say they divide across that spectrum quite as neatly or strictly as these previous pairs. But this is where the relationships between the Major Arcana become a little more ambiguous. It's very difficult to break the Major Arcana into neat sets. And while I see that this 5 and 6 kind of pair off nicely, so do the 6 and 7 kind of connect. And in fact, the 6, 7, 8, I think, set up a really nice trio, where in the 6 we have this rising action of making the deviation. And in the 7, we follow through with it until we resolve in the 8 at strength. So in a way, I see the Hierophant and the Lovers as a pair, while at the same time, I see these 3 as a trio, kind of connect each other. There's a lot of interesting ways in which the Major Arcana connect, and there's a variety of ways in which they do, and many people will present different systems and ways that they can connect, and whatever adds to their meaning for you as a reader is a good one. And I should take a moment to say that any definitions that I add to the cards are my own take, and I am sharing, like 25 plus years of experience reading cards, so there's a lot of meaning that these cards have grown to have for me. And of course, a lot of different resources that I've studied over the years that have added to their definition also, that I'm drawing on here in the information I present to you in this stream. That said, everyone has a different take on the cards. They are tools for a unique and personal, intuitive practice, and whatever I share about the cards that resonates with you, I would say, great, hold on to that, take it. And anywhere that you see different things of the cards, or you're reading other resources, watching other people, and getting different messages, again, take away what resonates for you from those places also. And let the composite, conglomerate, be the message that you associate with that card. All we're doing is we are establishing the language with which we will communicate with the divine. The intention and definition that we give the cards before they're drawn adds to the richness and complexity that we'll be able to engage in our conversation with the divine. And so it really is. I've really enjoyed the lifelong practice of these cards growing and deepening in meaning as they've appeared to me in readings and become associated with real life instances in my own life, as it's appeared for me in the hundreds of readings I've done with other people, and how they've added definition through those people's experiences to me anecdotally. There's so much beauty to the growth of your practice with tarot, and really your learning of not just tarot, but just how human life works. Tarot just offers a system to understand and kind of try to partition out and script out how human life works, so that we can try to grasp and put it in order, pattern it out in the way that helps make sense to us. That's why tarot is usually something that we turn to when we're feeling uncertain about the situation we're in, and we're looking for validation or clarity or insight or perspective or direction. It's what we turn to the tarot for usually. I still have time, so I want to carry on. The tower's still a stretch goal. I'm going to try. We're moving on to the Hermit. the 9th in the set. This is interesting because at this point, we've realized that we have this will that we can draw on to influence the world. And now we're looking at, what does that mean about who I am? At this point, the Hermit is a very reflective, usually very self-reflective card. Gender trash. First of all, I'm still not over your name. I love it. Secondly, I'm glad that you'll be here next week. That's great. I'm really working to include some sort of continuity in the shuffle so that it really presents itself as an ongoing, evolving course to help learn and practice tarot. And I'm so excited to be doing this. I want to talk about the Hermit. The Hermit is this moment of reflection. Now that we're this far in the cycle, we have a bit to reflect on. And there are some questions for us to ask ourselves about what we've done. Because initially we were presented the world as it was, and we found a way that we wanted to interact with it. And then we were presented, there's a lot of ways that the world's been being handled already that you just have to work with. Those are the boundaries in the Hierophant that just exist, pre-exist before you. And we decided, I'm gonna do my own thing. And the Lovers, and we carried it through, and we resolved its strength. Now that I've arrived there, I'm looking back at, who am I? Who does this indicate I am if I chose to do these things? Who am I? What do I want? What am I about? What am I doing all this for? This is suddenly where the Fool's previously kind of simple experience becomes more rich and complex because they're really asking why? Why? Why am I? Fundamentally, this really profound question about our own personhood, about our own character, our own being. So the Hermit asks some really profound questions about yourself and prompts that self-reflection. Appearing in a reading, the Hermit usually resembles that time to pause and to really reflect on what's brought you here and why you brought yourself here and wanted to be here. And oftentimes, I love the card that comes after the Hermit in the cycle. So I'm going to move on to that because there's something interesting about how much we can learn through self-reflection, how much we can learn through self-knowing about the world around us and about how we fit into it and work with it. So much fundamentally about the work that we do with anything trying to realize our will and manifest our will in the world comes back to understanding ourselves. Know thyself is one of these highest tenets, and it's one of the practices that tarot is very good at engaging and helping you really work your way through. And the fascinating things that come forward from knowing ourselves are sometimes some of these deepest truths and realizations and some of the most powerful direction that we get from our lives. Where the tarot sees the Hermit resolving is into the Wheel of Fortune, which resembles sort of, this card really is the symbol for the action of fate on our lives. This really resembles those extra-personal elements that we don't have control over kind of falling into place. Because when we are acting as and understanding our true selves, things just tend to work out. It's just this really curious, fascinating aspect of being, is that when you really are being yourself, doing your own thing, that's when things start really working for you. Which should, I guess, when I say it out loud, sound obvious. Be yourself, do your thing for yourself, and it'll serve you. Duh. But really, it's kind of fascinating how that comes forward in such a profound, deeper way as resembled in the Wheel of Fortune, where it almost just feels as like all the elements kind of align and work out for us. The Wheel of Fortune really resembles those unexpected ways that just doing our thing, being ourselves and doing our thing, comes back to serve us in ways that were beyond our comprehension and our understanding, but still came back in the end to serve us. I love that. Here we are this late in the cycle And the Fool is now really thinking about what's my place in the world? Who am I? What am I about? And what does that mean that I want to do going forward? Is there anything about me that I want to change? Is there anything about me that I want to keep, that I want to focus on, bring forward more? And with these realizations and these better, deeper understandings of their character, the Fool enters the Wheel of Fortune, where they realize that being themselves and going forward with themselves and really just putting their will out there is one part of it. The other part is fate meeting you, the world meeting you there. And that's the part that you can't really count on. That's the part where in strength we just persevere longer and longer and longer because we know I just got to keep going until it's my lucky moment. But if I stop going, I can't get my lucky moment. The Wheel of Fortune resembles that time in the cycle where we get our lucky break. And what we were really seeking is sort of coming to us. I consider it a pretty lucky card when it appears in a reading. Or that it, at least in a reading, points us to anticipating the action of those elements outside of ourselves that we don't have direct control over, and that it is a time for us to trust in the law of attraction and really put our intention out there in a way where we are aiming for the stars. We're looking to really achieve that highest end that myself wants to be at, that fate can offer us. The Wheel of Fortune says, take the gamble, because you'll get what you get, as much as you can get. And that's what the universe offers you. I really like where this goes after this, because after experiencing this much of the world, the Fool is now beginning, after asking questions in the Hermit, who am I? Why did I do all those things earlier in the cycle? Why did I deviate from the norm? Why did I want to establish my own domain and be the boss of my own people or my own self, my own life? Why? It brings us to the Justice, where now we're really thinking about fairness. I'm asking those same why questions, but I'm considering perspectives outside of my own. Justice really wants to weigh and consider all perspectives. I really want to understand the world and the issue at hand from every angle that I can. I want to collect as much information I can, hear as many viewpoints as possible, because I've experienced that there's a whole world out there. It was hinted to me in the High Preistess. I could kind of feel it. And then I went through my own process, looked deep within myself in the Hermit, and realized all those answers are lying within me in a weird way. And in a weird way, tapping into myself draws and manifests the world I want to me. And that just worked out in the Wheel of Fortune. So now I'm thinking about, what is the mechanism of fate, of the world around me, and how do I operate in a way with it that is fair, that is right, that is just? Justice is really seeking to draw meaning and make clear a path and direction and choice that is weighted by everything that they can consider. Now that I'm aware that there's so much of the world at play, so many moving parts in that Wheel of Fortune, I really want to be acting with respect to those moving parts, to all the people in my life, in my world, and outside of it. Justice is where we really consider every viewpoint before moving forward and making a choice. And where we start asking those same questions that came up in the Hermit, but instead of asking, why am I and what am I about, it's asking, I don't know, why anything and what is everyone about? And how should we move forward in a way that honors all of our wills? We got all these competing wills out there, all these things that we all want to do. And now I'm wondering, what's right, what's fair, when it's so complicated that we got all these different ideas out there in the mix. Justice is trying to make sense of all those voices. This takes us to a very fun place in the Hanged Man, which I alluded to earlier when we were looking at the Fool. I do see some similarities between the Fool's fresh new perspective on things. The Hanged Man is where we get back to that feeling. It shows someone hanging upside down. And it means to resemble this literal experience of hanging yourself upside down, looking at the same scenery, the same scenario, the same life, but upside down in a totally new way. And it casts it in a whole new light so that once we've experienced our life as the Hanged Man, it feels like a completely new thing. The same stuff in front of us. Nothing has fundamentally changed about the world about us, but we've considered the world from different viewpoints. Now I'm really asking, how is the world in other people's shoes? And we're seeing the world in a completely new way, in such a profoundly new way that the world feels completely different. Feels like my world has been turned upside down in the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man really resembles that moment of incredible clarity and profound realization that comes from our world being completely and fundamentally shifted and changed by just our perception of it and nothing else. There's nothing changing about our world and reality in the Hanged Man, just our perspective of it. And okay, I've made it to death, which is going to be the last of the Major Arcana that I touch on today. I did not make it all the way to the tower. I've made it to death, which is about half. 13, there's 22. We're doing good. Next week, I'll finish the Major Arcana. But I'm going to follow through here. Death is a fun card in the Major Arcana and in Tarot. And it's usually one of those sensational cards. When we see death, we're like, ah, death! And it's really funny. It doesn't literally mean death, but sort of the figurative representation of death in the Tarot resembles nature's eventual course, that old things must move out of the way for new things to come in. You know, there's usually death is coming through with a banner that has usually like a rose or some beautiful blossoming flower. And it's to resemble this idea that you have to prune away the dead leaves on the bush for what remains to grow. Death. I see you in the chat again there. Adrian says, death is fun. Yeah, that's me. I come across cards like the Tower and Death, and I'm like, I love this card. It's fun. But, you know, I'm this blind optimist idealist, so grain of salt for everything that I offer. The death can be a difficult experience because removing some old aspects of our life can be difficult. There's a lot to separate ourselves from, a lot to move away from, a lot to grow out of in death. But death really does resemble how there is an eventual end to all things. And there's a right time for things to end so that those new things propagating and coming up can keep going forward and not be burdened by the person that we were before, the ways that things were before. Death is the natural course by which society evolves. Newer generations come in, and now we have teenagers that are like, whatever, why can't every gender just wear skirts and go to school like that? And I'm like, fuck yes. But we're looking at, you know, this eventual transition of life and customs as presented in death. It follows the Hanged Man. Because once we've explored kind of other perspectives in justice, realized the world in a whole new way after really gathering everything that we learned in justice. And now it's very clear. From here, it's very clear what needs to be pruned away in death. And this is where we're getting some of the answers. In the Hermit, we were saying, what am I about? Why am I about this? In justice, we're really beginning to question ourselves, really beginning to question our motives. And in death, we're moving forward and saying, these are the things that are not right, are not fair, will not serve me or others, that I'm going to push away, let go of, and move away from. Death resembles radical change. Really just this, you know, death is not a subtle note. You know, the death and passing of a person or a lifestyle or a way of being is a serious event that resembles a dramatic shift. So again, all of our major arcana usually resemble these very dramatic, large sort of moments. So they are very heavy cards when they appear in a reading. And death is this very dramatic shift. Letting go of the past, in comes the new. And that's the interesting thing about death in tarot, is that it sort of resembles new life as much as it does death and the passing of old ways. There are new ways that come through that. We're just clearing away the muck so that that rose can blossom forward.